This video looks at brain scans as a methodology within the biological approach. You need to know three different brain scanning techniques. You need to know CAT scans, PET scans, and MRI scans, in particular functional MRI scans. You need to be able to describe and evaluate these three different types of brain scans and also be able to outline how brain scans are used to investigate aggression. Okay, the first one we're going to look at here is a CAT scan, which is a computed assisted tomography scan. Now, a CAT scan basically uses a series of X-ray beams that pass through the head, creating a cross-sectional image of the brain, which shows the structure of the brain but not the function, and that bit down there is really key. So if you were going to go for a CAT scan, you would have to remove all of your jewellery, you would lie down on a scanner, it'd take about 20-30 minutes. The staff in the room would leave the room and talk to you through an intercom, and the scanner then makes a first picture, rotates around small movements in your head and takes further pictures. It's completely painless, and it helps to produce detailed images. The next one you need to know is a positron emission tomography, which in short is a PET scan. Now, a PET scan uses a radioactive material which is injected into you before the PET scan, which allows to produce an image of the brain. Now, it's important to note straight away that a PET scan gives an overall image of activity levels within the brain. Now, once this radioactive material is within your bloodstream, it will flow through the brain, and the oxygen and glucose will accumulate in the brain areas that are metabolically active. Now, as the glucose is used in the active parts of the brain, the radioactive material breaks down and it gives off a neutron and a positron. When a positron hits an electron, they're both destroyed and the two gamma rays are released. And it is the gamma ray detectors that record the brain area where the gamma rays are emitted from. Now, this gives us a functional view of the brain, so it shows us which areas are involved in language, for example, if you're being asked to speak during the PET scan, or it'll show us functions of different parts of the brain. Now, it's really important in your exam that you understand this idea of the positron. So the PET scan detects the energy emitted by the positively charged particles, which are called positrons, and as the radioactive tracer is broken down inside the patient's body, the positrons are made. And this energy appears as a three-dimensional image on a computer monitor. And it's this image that reveals how parts of the patient's body function as a way that they break down the radioactive tracer. And the PET image will display these different levels of positrons according to brightness and colour. So if you look here, any aspects of the PET scan that show red show a very high activity level within the brain. Orange to yellow shows high activity, green is then the neutral medium activity, and then we go further down into blue and purple showing low activity, and then black will show no activity at all. PET scans are mainly carried out for medical purposes, so they may be able to check the damage made by a stroke, but they're also used a lot in research as to how the brain works. Now, a really important example of this is RAIN, which is your classic study within the biological approach. Use PET scans on murderers pleading not guilty by reason of insanity to compare their PET scans with those of a control group to see if he could isolate areas that controlled aggression. PET scans are really helpful because they can be compared with normal individuals as a baseline in order for us to be able to learn more about illnesses or brain damage. And things like epilepsy and other conditions are studied through PET scans by looking at the blood flow to the brain. Now, PET scans are really helpful because they're a reasonably non-invasive way of giving us a study of the brain and being able to see levels of activity. However, be careful because the radioactive tracer that's injected is invasive. Now, they're reasonably ethical. You give your permission to have a PET scan. They're not necessarily painful. They're quite valid. They show what they claim to show. So speech has been consistently found to the Broca's area. So this has obviously been repeated. It's been replicated, which means that it's reliable, because when we replicate a PET scan, we found the same results, and the same areas of the brain are consistently found for different activities. However, the use of the radioactive tracer is invasive, so there are ethical issues. The researcher must follow the ethical guidelines and make sure that all participants have gained informed consent, and that any time this is taken is because they've got a good reason to do so. Patients have also said that the scan itself is very claustrophobic, so it's really important that this is explained to the patient before the PET scan takes place. PET scans are also quite difficult to isolate the brain functioning because there are lots of areas that will show high activity within a PET scan when only completing one task. So, for example, people can read passages of text while being scanned, but they would almost certainly be using other parts of their brain as well. A previous exam question or an exam question that was released on the SAMs is just outlining here the detail that you need to know PET scans in. So you're asked to describe the PET scan as a brain scanning technique for 3 marks. An example shown down here is a PET scan is a way of measuring brain activity, will always get you 1 mark. The person requiring the scan has some radioactive glucose injected into their arm or their blood. The tracer emits positrons, which give out gamma rays, which can be detected by the scanner. That's your 2nd mark. And then the radioactive glucose is detected by the PET scanner as it moves to the parts of the brain that are required to complete the task or that are working at that moment in time. Will give you the 3rd mark. Okay, moving on to the 3rd scan now, which is an MRI scan, which is a magnetic resonance imaging. Now, MRI scans detect the amount of radio frequency signals produced by displayed radio waves in a magnetic field, and it provides an anatomical view of the brain, as you can see in the flashing picture on the screen. The whole body is placed inside a tube, so again, like PET scans, it's quite claustrophobic. It's noisy though, but it isn't painful. Now, MRI scans require the person to stay very, very still. They don't show the activity levels as a PET scans, but functional MRI scans can be used to show activity, and we'll look at those in a second. Before the MRI scan, a dye called a contrast medium is injected into the body to help show up body organs and relevant areas. Now, MRI scans, as we talked about before, use magnetic waves in order to be able to show the function, the structure of the brain. And there's no X-rays or radioactive material used. It provides a detailed view of the brain in different dimensions. It's safe, it's painless, and there's no special preparation that needs to happen apart from obviously removing all the metal. It's valid because what is found in the scan is often then found in reality. So, for example, if a MRI scan shows up a brain tumour or a structure within the brain, when surgery has then happened, it's then proved to be valid in that has then been found in the area of the brain identified by the MRI scan. They are more ethical, so it means that we don't have to test on animals. And they're replicated, so again, like PET scans, when repeated, the same results have been found, and they can also be said to be objective because more than one person can check the scan. They are stressful though, because in certain cases an ejection has been given. They're extremely noisy and claustrophobic, which can induce stress into a patient. And MRI scans only measure particular things, so for example, clear images of soft tissue and body organs, but brain activity is not measured. Which is where we move on to functional MRI scans. You're more likely to get a question on a functional MRI scans because they're like the updated versions of MRI scans. Because functional MRI scans allow us to see brain activity. Now, these work by detecting changes in blood oxygenation and the flow that occur in the response to the neural activity. So when a brain area is more active, it consumes more oxygen, and to meet this, there is an increased demand of blood flow to that active area. Now, the fMRI scans can be used to produce activation maps which show which parts of the brain are involved in a particular mental process. Now, this is reasonably non-invasive again, and it's without the risks of radiation that may be present in CT scans or PET scans. It's a highly spatial resolution, so 2 to 3 millimeters is typical, but resolution can be as good as 1 millimeter, which means it's particularly accurate. It records signals from all regions of the brain, unlike EEGs, which are biased towards the cortical surface of the brain. Now, they're widely used, and standard data analysis approaches have been developed which allow researchers to compare results across the labs, and they produce compelling images of brain activation. However, there is a lot of dispute over whether or not the actual measures what it claims to measure what it's supposed to measure. So, for example, increased levels of oxygen could be in preparation for neural activity and not necessarily because of it. Again, we've talked about the noise. They're very, very noisy machines, which often make it difficult to pick up changes in oxygenated blood flow. The images produced must be interpreted carefully, since correlation does not imply causation. So again, being able to show a high level of activity in a certain amount of the brain shows, you can show a correlation, you can show that that occurs during a high level of activity, but it doesn't necessarily show a cause or effect relationship. Linking then to how brain scans can be used to investigate aggression, think Rain et al. Think about how he was able to determine that low levels of activity within the prefrontal cortex have been linked to high aspects of aggression, so murder, for example, and then also how conclusions have been drawn from that about maybe the aggression was a result of not thinking through the consequences, not being able to consider the effects of actions. Think about being able to investigate aspects of the limbic system, the amygdala, the role in the amygdala, whether that shows high or low levels of activity during aggression acts. And also, if you're studying the A2 aspect of the course, think about linking this to issues and debates. So practical issues in the design and implementation of research, so issues in scanning and measuring the complexity of the brain. This does support psychology of a science. We're looking at synaptic transmission, brain scanning techniques, how these are objective measures to measure different brain activity. An understanding of how psychological knowledge is developed over time. So, for example, how functional MRI scans are now used in order to be able to detect brain activity. But also issues of social control, so using the knowledge of brain functions to control individuals, which lead to a diagnosis or a stigma placed on that individual based on what the brain scan has shown.